Is it just to punish drug users? Abstract. The war on drugs began in the 1870s on opium smoking due to the fear that Chinamen would take advantage of American white women. This led to Dr. Hamilton Wright from Ohio, who is famous for becoming the United States' first opium commissioner in 1911, that argued that of all the nations of the world, the United States consumes the most habit-forming drugs per capita. This action drove a panic to start with in America. Fear driving racially charged claims linking cocaine use to African Americans, and opium to Chinese immigrants. This racism triggered a moral panic, intense fear of crime caused by drug-induced motives that empowered the legislative to draft the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. The good Reverend Charls Henry Brent from the Philippines characterized as gallant and daring despised opium due to the effects it had on the user's spirit. Charls Henry Brent started a war on opium in the Philippines that led to the founding of the International Opium Commission in 1909. Regulation and addiction. This argument falls upon the shoulders of the rationale behind prosecution on the user when political rhetoric is at fault in relation to addiction. Moral clarity and self-determination to self-govern are components that American society holds very dear due to the lack of patience for ignorance and self-destruction. Self-induced addiction can, and is a derivative of lacking self-care, primarily counseling. The idea of counseling may not be particularly ideal or affordable, which can create a stigma to the notion. Stigma to counseling can resort to violence and vandalism of pharmaceutical companies, home invasions, and pharmacies. The technical enforcement of the law keeps track of records, documents, that help lobbyists address the state of emergency that is illicit drug use. In regards to falling victim of drug use due to a lack of interpretation of the law does keep law enforcement paid and funded. Understandably, the epidemiology that depicts America having 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners is the depiction that is based on fact. The wave that fluctuates because of the political outcome with the cushion that must be countered with law enforcement on the public. Individuals' perception of laws that are no longer felonies and have been reduced down to misdemeanors can be seen as a leniency to said materials to be less harmful. Individuals suffering from pain or mental anguish may see sharing of prescription drugs as a solution that instead can turn severe. To give insight on the revelation that the war on drugs is a complex network of political justifications to reason and unreason with moral clarity in mind is ultimately falling upon the hearts of the parents. If it is a war, how is it that parents that have to bury their children lost on American soil from drugs receive no honorary medal to pay tribute to their service as Americans? The war on drugs. Judge Gray describes how Americans' absorption of information should parallel to their freedoms of consumption, stating, "The government has as much of a right to control what I, as an adult, put into my body as it does what I put into my mind." This quote points to the rationale behind the motivation that the federal government uses to enforce lawsuit upon American citizens. Judge Gray states 6 groups: the drug cartels and their dealers, terrorist organization, gangs, corrupt foreign officials, prison industry, and the bureaucracy behind law enforcement. Within his description, a layout of the blueprint begins to emerge, linking the law enforcement agencies that receive their funding from politicians that use the data received to draft bills designed to prioritize incarceration instead of rehabilitation of the delinquents is an elaborate way to continue to fund the destruction of narco-terrorism. With information readily available, narco-terrorism intermingle and communicate under radars and through networks, whether it be a game chat line or on throwaway phones known as burners. The practicality within the notion that addiction itself can be defeated is unrealistic due to it having unregulatory properties. During a TED Global talk, Ethan Nadelmans famously talked to the entitled, "Why We Need to End the War on Drugs." Nadelman marched to the address of domestic psychosis, correlated one of the equivalents to ideology that is prohibition in the 1920s, the incarceration of black and brown individuals targeted prejudice enforcement of the law. Nadelman described how prejudice itself as a form of psychosis induces stress epinephrine to be released from the pituitary gland, which ensues into white dominant male which in society. Pre-perpetuated violence through law enforcement can be seen as racism on black and brown communities. Epinephrine released by the adrenal glands induced can be due to stress. If this form of stressed epinephrine is induced and triggered into psychosis, that would be due to the primarily driven dopamine receptors within the limbic system as the pharmacodynamics. Stress-induced epinephrine is absorbed and eliminated, this is pharmacokinetics. After the expulsion of this stress-induced epinephrine, the dominant individual can be proud in their racial-driven cycle for political gain. The central impediment is that religious ideology impedes taxation on commodities that can be enforced by stricter regulation and legalization. This European form of implementation within America can be seen as a form of adoption to the political practices that have already been proven successful abroad. Implementation of judge-grade scheduling looks like a full overhaul at the federal level. The removal cannabis and other substances from the Controlled Substances Act will aid in the generation of structures to allow the users to dispense substance of preference from prescriptions, and if need be receive the treatment that follows for administering. Understandably, regulated dispensaries maintaining an actual license from the federal government to operate remotely, or by brick-and-mortar store. Regulated prescriptions from physicians will no longer be up to the consumer to price shop, or jump around from dispensary to dispensary in hopes to receive more substances than what is needed, or prescribed. The secret ingredient within James P. Gray reference to the Netherlands coffee shops is to separate the sell cannabis and other non-harmful substances, also known as soft drug, from other markets that distribute hard drug. Regulation to exposure of heroin or methamphetamine can reduce the distribution of addictive substances to minors and/or other persons purchasing such products. Mandated continuing education for the consumer and the licensor for consumption and distribution would be the hallmark of the project-ready available treatment programs with low turnover rates to efficiently deliver rehabilitation to the public. Would ensure high success rate. Would ensure high success rate. Slogans like "Curiosity cured the cat" would be staples to live by development within the mind of the adolescent. Drugs is just another commodity. There are limits to the amount of consumption or face healthcare risk. To address the continuing paradox of prohibition that states that by making a drug illegal, the government unintentionally increases its potency, its profitability, and its danger to the user. This is done through certain channels. Primarily through law enforcement that increases pressure on traffickers that in turn switch to more concentrated potent forms of the drug, such as a shift from opium to heroin to fentanyl. The second channel is the implication due to zero in truth in labeling users do not know the purity or the dose when purchased on the black market, leading to accidental overdoses. The third violence would not have to exist if the market was regulated through proper channels. High demand products creates massive profits. The cartels are benefiting from these exchanges, and fueling drugs into the neighborhoods where gangs participate in open illicit activities. In conclusion, American citizens should take part in active listening as it pertains to the Netherlands and the open job market. Epidemiology should be taken into consideration at all times, not just for personal knowledge on drug activity in the United States but in the Netherlands as well. Epidemiology is the bread and butter to also understand what is needed in order for the reduction of addiction within the United States of America. References in the description.